It's upstairs. It sounds like
On the 27th of March, a deadly shooting took place at a private Christian school just south of downtown Nashville, the capital of the U.S. state of Tennessee. The rampage lasted about 14 minutes.
Let's go! Metro Police!
Before the Nashville police, armed with rifles, heavy vests, and helmets, entered the building, confronted and killed the school shooter.
Stop moving! Stop moving!
This is the latest episode of gun violence that has devastated American families and communities. At the Covenant School in Nashville, the students had just begun their final full week of classes before Easter break, when the tragedy unfolded. 6 people were killed, including 3 9-year-old students.
It was horrific and horrible, but unfortunately it's becoming more prevalent and almost more of a norm, which isn't okay. I teach young children, and just that's just hard. It's hard to understand it.
It's sickening. I mean, it's not the first time we've talked about school shootings, but obviously it's the first time that it's hit so close. You know, I mean, it's not just Nashville, it's our neighbor. And so that's been an extra level of a gut punch.
The surveillance video showed the shooter driving up to the school and ducking into the building through the broken glass. According to police, the shooter was armed with 2 assault-style weapons and a handgun. The shooter was identified by police as Audrey Hale. The gender identity of the assailant was initially unclear, although it was later confirmed that Hale identified as transgender. Officials used she and her to refer to the shooter, but according to a social media post and the LinkedIn profile, the shooter appeared to identify as male in recent months. The 28-year-old assailant was a former student.
She was under care, doctor's care, for an emotional disorder. Law enforcement knew nothing about the treatment she was receiving, but her parents felt that she should not own weapons. They were under the impression that when she sold the one weapon that she did not own anymore. As it turned out, she had been hiding several weapons within the house.
Why would an ex-student open fire? What was the motive?
We also don't have a motive at this time. We feel that the students that were targeted were randomly targeted. There was not any particular student that she was looking for at the time of the incident.
The police said the shooter had made a detailed map of the school and conducted surveillance of the building before carrying out the massacre.
There have been so many mass shootings in America. They're each different in their own way, but there's a common theme in every case, and that is someone has a grievance. They're mad about something or resentful about something. And although it differs in each case as to whether they have any mental difficulties or whether they're perfectly rational, what they all have in common is easy access to military assault style rifles like the AR-15. In every case, it's becoming more common that some target is chosen where there'll be mass casualties.
But for God's sakes, we have to do something about it. What kind of a civilization does not defend their children?
This brings us to the big question. Why have mass shootings in the US increased sharply in the recent past? The Nashville school shooting left the city in a state of melancholy. Thousands gathered at the Covenant School for a candlelight vigil to honor and mourn the 3 children and 3 adults slain in the attack. The downtown ceremony was also attended by US First Lady Jill Biden, but there was no talk of gun control at the vigil. People steered clear of the burning political issue. Republicans and Democratic lawmakers stood together in remembrance of those killed. Meanwhile, US President Joe Biden condemned the Nashville school shooting a day after the incident, describing it as sick and calling on lawmakers to do more to stop gun violence.
We're monitoring the situation really closely, Ben, as you know, and we have to do more to stop gun violence. It's ripping our communities apart, ripping the soul of this nation, ripping at the very soul of the nation. And we have to do more to protect our schools so they aren't turned into prisons. You know, the shooter in this situation reportedly had 2 assault weapons and a pistol, 2 AK-47. So I call on Congress again to pass my assault weapons ban. It's about time that we begin to make some more progress.
The aftermath of the school shooting in Nashville also led to an act of political retaliation. Tennessee Republicans expelled 2 Democratic lawmakers, Justin Jones and Justin J. Pearson, who are both black, have been expelled from the chamber.
I hereby declare Representative Justin J. Pearson of the 86th Representative District expelled from the House of Representatives of the 103rd.
Action was taken against them for not breaking the law, but for leading student activists in gun control chant from the House floor. In the process, tens of thousands of voters they represent in Nashville and Memphis respectively were disenfranchised. Another Democrat, Gloria Johnson, a white woman, narrowly escaped expulsion.
So the question whether it's a state legislature like Tennessee, where these 2 representatives were trying to make a change this week, or in Washington, D.C. in the House of Representatives or the Senate, the question is there the political will and a sufficient number of people in the majority to agree in legislation an interpretation of what these words in the Second Amendment mean? That the chance of trying to amend the Second Amendment itself is almost 0, since an amendment to the Constitution would require 3/4 of the states to approve it and 2/3 of each house of our Congress.
Just 2 weeks after the Nashville shooting incident, on the 10th of April, another shooting grabbed the headlines. 5 people were killed and at least 8 injured at the downtown bank in Louisville, Kentucky. This is the 15th mass killing of the year in the US. President Biden condemned the latest mass shooting in a tweet.
Oh my God. Can we get this person in here?
The Gun Violence Archive, an American non-profit group, defines a mass shooting as a shooting where 4 or more people are killed or injured, excluding the gunman. It has tracked 146 such incidents in the US since the start of the year 2023. The surge in gun violence has stirred what has now become a familiar and highly political debate in the US over gun ownership rights. Why has the country repeatedly failed to pass major gun control legislation? It's a simple question, but the answers are extremely complicated. Guns are ubiquitous in the United States. In fact, there are more guns than people in the country. The latest figures from the Small Arms Survey, a Swiss-based research project, estimated that there were 390 million guns in circulation in the US in 2018. The ratio of 120.5 firearms per 100 residents, up from 88 per 100 in 2011, far surpassed that of other countries around the world.
A dramatic loosening of gun laws over the past several decades, and particularly over the past several years, have just made it incredibly easy for people to get firearms. And so I think the most important factor is access to firearms. There are many disturbed people all over the world, but they don't all commit mass shootings. In the United States, we have a system in many states right now where you can literally, in many states, just walk into a store or a gun show and come away with an AR-15, a semi-automatic rifle. And so I think part of the story here is access to firearms.
Gun sales in the US reached a record 23 million in 2020, a 65% increase from 2019, and remained high in 2021 as well.
I was firing, bang, bang, bang.
Global firearm ownership is heavily concentrated in the United States. According to a Pew Research Center survey conducted in June 2021, 4 in 10 US adults say they live in a household with a gun, including 30% who say they personally own one. Why is it so easy for civilians to own firearms?
You have to have a state ID. You have to be a resident of the state. You go down to your local gun shop, pick out what you want. They call in your personal information to the FBI. You are either approved or denied to buy a gun. They issue if you're approved, and most are, you're issued a purchase number, which the dealer writes on your paperwork to prove that, yes, they did conduct the background check. Now, all these people that we've been doing lately, in terms of they don't have any history of being crazy, why don't these mental illness things be entered into, the FBI's computers? Well, it's called HIPAA, which basically means the privacy laws say you don't.
Gun ownership in the United States is rooted in the Second Amendment of the Constitution. Second Amendment has been shaping American politics for years now. The Second Amendment to the United States Constitution protects the right to keep and bear arms. Ratified on December 15, 1791, it was a part of the first 10 amendments of the United States Constitution, called the Bill of Rights. The concept of such a right existed within English common law long before the enactment of the Bill of Rights. The Second Amendment states, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. It was created to give American citizens the opportunity to fight back against a tyrannical federal government. But in the 20th century, the definition of the amendment seemed to have changed forever. Be it the killing of the 35th President of the United States, John F. Kennedy, who was fatally shot on November 22, 1963, or the assassination of African-American civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr. on April 4, 1968, the amendment has always been controversial.
The fight over guns in America has really been a legal fight, a judicial fight, a juridical fight that has been about what's the interpretation of the Second Amendment. For really a couple centuries in our history, we assumed that when they said that a well-regulated militia had the right to own guns, they meant an army, which I think would be a natural and logical reading of a sentence like that. But starting in the 1980s, the NRA really, the National Rifle Association here, really had a push that funded politicians and judges to say that a militia means a person. And so really since the 1980s, and particularly since the early 2000s, we've pushed to say that really what that means is that every citizen should have the right to own a gun. And that opened the floodgates for the arms race that we see in our own country.
In October 1968, following these two high-profile killings, the Gun Control Act was signed into law by President Lyndon B. Johnson. It banned mail-order sales of rifles and shotguns and prohibited most felons, drug users, and people found mentally incompetent from buying guns. Even aliens were listed under the act. However, in 1986, the Congress passed the so-called Firearms Owners Protection Act, which undid many of the provisions in the 1968 Gun Control Act. The bill allowed dealers to sell rifles, shotguns, and ammunition through the mail and later the internet. In 1993, President Bill Clinton, an advocate of gun control, signed the Brady Handgun Control Bill into law. The law required a prospective handgun buyer to wait 5 business days while the authorities check on his or her background, during which time the sale is approved or prohibited based on an established set of criteria.
Under President Clinton, there was a ban on military-style assault rifles that was in place for 10 years. But to get it passed, he had to agree that it would have to be renewed after 10 years. And at the end of those 10 years, the politics in America were such, and the lobbying by the gun lobby, the National Rifle Association, was so strong and powerful that the ban could not be extended.
In 2008, the Supreme Court ruled for the first time in the country's history, striking down a strict gun control law in the U.S. Capitol. The court struck down 2 parts of the country's strictest gun control law, adopted in Washington, D.C. 32 years ago. The ban on private handgun possession and the requirement that firearms be kept at home, be unloaded and disassembled or bound by a trigger lock.
In the United States, the states, in terms of their gun laws, split very evenly, just like we do in our politics, red states and blue states. So you have some states like California, Massachusetts, where you have restrictions on assault weapons, and many other states where you do not. The attempts to legislate delays or limits on how many guns you can have, or how many bullets for each cartridge for each gun, or what type of gun, most of that's being blocked now in state legislatures or in the federal government. The effort to extend the background check system and put in place red flag laws to try to identify people that might be inclined to use a gun. There's only been very modest progress.
The gun laws clearly had no discernible effect on reducing gun deaths over the years. Numerous programs have been launched to mitigate gun violence around the country. One of them is the gun buyback program. The primary goal of gun buyback programs is to prevent firearm violence by reducing the stock of firearms in a community. In February this year, the American state of Texas offered its residents a chance to get rid of their pistols, rifles, and semi-automatic weapons. Hundreds of people brought rifles and other firearms that remained unused at their homes.
My husband deceased a year ago, and I'm just trying to get guns out of the house. I don't even know how to shoot a gun. I just want to get them, and drop them here. So, I have grandkids, and I don't want my grandkids to get a hold to them.
We have enough weapons, and some of the ones we're getting rid of, we don't need. So why hold on to them?
Gun buyback efforts allow gun owners to trade their firearms to law enforcement, reducing illegal guns from circulation and preventing them from falling into the hands of a criminal. But previous studies of such programs have typically concluded that they don't have the desired effect on firearm homicide and suicide rates. Is there anything else that can be done to prevent such tragic shooting events? Can the police force be better prepared? Last year, around 100 police officers participated in an active shooting drill in a school campus in Florida. Firearms instructors guided and assessed their response to a shooting on a busy school day.
We are trained to stop the killer and not by arresting them. If they come in shooting kids, there's no negotiating. We're going to make them dead real quick. And that's a phrase that I use because as a parent, that's what I want to hear.
Police officers carry out drills by recreating a scenario they hope they never have to respond to. Because an actual shooting spree is far more dangerous than one can ever imagine. It can leave hundreds dead and countless others in trauma for the rest of their lives. Ralph Norman, a 30-year-old, is a survivor of gun violence. He was rendered paraplegic by a stray bullet at a gas station. The incident happened 13 years ago, and it changed his life forever.
I can no longer move my forelimbs. I can only move my head and my shoulders.
We have much more systematic data collection on deaths, and we know that around 40,000 people every year die from firearm injury in this country. And we see that about twice as many people survive as die. So there were over 80,000 visits to emergency departments, including people who get admitted to the hospital every year during that time period for firearm injury.
In another case, Rhonda McLean was shot in the head while trying to take cover during a shooting in Philadelphia. He was just 10 years old at the time of the incident. His right hand became partially paralyzed. It also took a toll on his mental health.
When I was there, I was pronounced dead for 2 minutes and 17 seconds. They had to do emergency surgery because the bullet fractured my skull and it exploded in my head, and I have 36 fragments in my head.
Stories of victims and survivors are a clear indication that gun violence is an epidemic in American society. Students should be able to go to school without fear. Public spaces should be safe for everyone. Will the policymakers pull the trigger of change before it gets too late?